All right, welcome back everyone. This is Unit 4, Lesson 1, Part 2, Ionic Bonding. All right, in our last video, we saw that chlorine has 7 valence electrons, really wants to get to 8 to satisfy that octet rule, and so it is going to gain 1 electron. But where does that electron come from? Well, remember, sodium had 1 valence electron, and it really wants to get rid of that so that it has an outer shell of 8 to satisfy its octet rule. So when sodium wants to lose this electron, chlorine is going to take it. And when that happens, when chlorine takes sodium's valence electron, they form an ionic bond. Now I want you to pay attention to the 2 things that are required for an ionic bond. The cations are going to be what give up an electron. These are always going to be metals. Anions are typically going to be nonmetals because they want to accept an electron. Just remember that, because as we go into covalent bonding, it's going to be important that you understand that when you have a metal and a nonmetal binding together, they form an ionic bond. So the combinations are endless. You can combine any cation and anion together to make an ionic compound. Now let's take a look at the table you filled out in the previous lesson video. And let's see what happens when we combine magnesium and fluorine together. So magnesium has 2 valence electrons because it's in the second column of the periodic table. So it needs to lose both of those electrons in order to be happy. Fluorine has 7 valence electrons because it is in the 7th column of the periodic table, and it can only accept 1 electron. So what happens when the ions don't gain or lose the exact same amount of electrons? Well, you're going to need multiple copies of fluorine so that magnesium can give 1 of its electrons to this fluorine, and the other electron will go to this fluorine. So you can either draw these out or you can count your electrons, and you need the overall charge to be equal to 0. So in this case, we have 1 positively charged magnesium and 2 negatively charged fluorine ions. When you add that up together, you're going to have 0 overall charge. All right, this is your activity that you need to fill out, and I am actually going to show you a simulator that you can use that's going to help you kind of visualize these things. So you can either draw these Lewis dot structures to fill out this table, and remember your goal is to make sure that the overall charge is 0. Or you can use this simulator. So let's see, which was my example here? Magnesium and fluorine. Let's see what happens when I drag a magnesium cation and a fluorine anion into the space. Well, here you can see magnesium gave up 2 electrons and fluorine can only accept 1. So to make this a neutral compound, I need to have 2 fluorines. So let's do another example. Let's do calcium and oxygen. Oh, and look at that. Calcium needed to give up 2 electrons and oxygen can gain 2 electrons. So you need 1 copy of each in order to get to a neutral compound. Probably the trickiest ones that you're going to come across are when you have something that has a 2 charge and something else that has a 3 charge. So let's see what happens here. Calcium can give up 2 electrons. Nitrogen needs 3 electrons to be happy. So we know we need to add another calcium. And now calcium has an extra electron that it needs to give up. So now we need to add another nitrogen. All right, and now nitrogen has 2 electrons that it needs to take from calcium. And there we go. So if I count up how many copies of each element I need 1, 2, 3 calcium ions and 1, 2 nitrogen ions. So you can use this simulator to help you fill out this table. If you would like more practice to figure out how the ions form and what their charge is going to be, click on this unlock mode button, and then it will ask you to predict the charge of different ions. So for sodium here, I'm going to use my periodic table and figure out that it's in the first column. So it has 1 valence electron, and when it loses that valence electron, it's going to have a positive charge. And now I've unlocked sodium for use here. So you're not going to be able to drag these until you unlock them. So this simulator should either be a link that you can click in your Google Classroom if CPS is able to work with me, or you will just download it onto your computer. Go ahead and fill this table out, and then the next slide will show you the answers. All right, here's the solution. As you can see, this Lewis dot drawing way of showing these is a lot less pretty than the simulator. So if you want to draw them out as puzzle pieces like the simulator has, you can do that instead. And that is all I have for you for part 2. Here are your vocabulary words. There is a Quizlet if you would like to use that to help you study. And most of these are words that we've talked a lot about in the past 2 videos. So copy them down, make sure you understand them, and you can move on to your bronze assignment.